The internet is a big, amazing, and complicated space where people build community, can create anything they can imagine, and make connections all around the world. I'm John Starr, advisor at Thorn, and this is Safe Space, a podcast about the people working behind the scenes to protect millions of users every day. These are the leaders of trust and safety, their stories, their journeys, and what fuels their mission to build a safer internet for all of us. I'm here today with John Buckley, the head of child safety policy at Google. John has spent his entire career working on child safety, from nonprofits to large tech companies. John is also an amazing human being. John, welcome to Safe Space. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, John, especially on St. Patrick's Day. It's very important to be here on our national day.
We are thrilled that you're here. As you can see, we have traded in our TrustCon studio for our home studio. We are excited for the second season of Safe Space. Excited to dig in here with John. If you're new to the podcast, we're all about bringing humanity to trust and safety, the humans who are behind the scenes to keep millions of users safe every day. So John, one of the things that I found really compelling about our pilot season 1 was hearing the stories of Yoel, Jarrell, and Patricia tying together their ambitions as a young person into roles in a field that didn't exist when we all were young. And so kicking that off with you as the first kind of opening question, what were your ambitions as a young person?
Yeah. Ambitions as a young person. When I was thinking about this question, I remember my mom telling me when I was younger, I wanted to grow up to be a cheetah. So that's where it all started. I didn't quite get that I couldn't be a cheetah, but when I realized and started to learn about the world, there was two things that stood out. One, it was always like a caring profession. That was something that I was interested in. My mom was a nurse. My dad was in a men rescue. I had an aunt who was a social worker. My granny was a doctor. And like these people kind of surrounded me, and they were most important people in my lives growing up. And so it always dabbled in, do I want to be a nurse or a paramedic? I wanted to be a lawyer for a while. And then I got to, finish school, and I actually ended up getting my fourth choice university course. I initially wanted to be a psychologist, and like a clinical psychologist, and support kids. So I got my fourth choice, and I didn't really know that was going to lead me to. I started university as a 17-year-old, which was very young. I had a fake ID for about 2 minutes until I got ripped up by a bouncer. And then I knuckled down to my studies, and I sat in on my first class, and my first class was with a professor called Tom Inglis. He wrote a book called Moral Monopoly, which was about Ireland's relationship with the Catholic Church. And I remember sitting down for my first lecture, and Tom started talking about Ireland's history with child sexual abuse and clerical sexual abuse. And I remember leaving that lecture going, okay, I can't unhear what I've just heard. I think this is the space I need to work. From cheetah as probably a 2-year-old all the way through kind of that caring profession and being surrounded by those people in my life, and then sitting down and hearing about my country's history with sexual abuse. I just feel like I was on this trajectory to do something, to be there to support children and to try and prevent child sexual abuse and work against it.
I mean, it's not surprising based on where you've taken your career from that moment that would be a crucial moment for you. So from cheetah to college and finding your path, let's take a few moments to have you walk us through your journey in trust and safety, knowing that everyone's journey is very unique. What was that kind of initial kind of entry point for you? And then take us through maybe how you then started working with and become more connected to, and ultimately join the trust and safety teams at some of the largest tech companies on the planet.
Starting out in the not-for-profit space, I worked for an Irish not-for-profit who run a service called Childline, just like a crisis support service, a listening service for children. And I was probably about 22 when I was young, and I was probably quite naive, and I had a lot to learn. And what I experienced working for this not-for-profit was how children were increasingly being wrapped around and native users of technology in various different ways. And as quite a young person in that space, like I was also kind of like an early adopter of like a lot of that kind of technology as well, and was a really big part of my life. And I could see it being a big part of the children who are accessing our services life. It kind of started to grow from there. And in all of the roles I've worked in, I've always found like a little nugget in that role that have really appealed to me. I've kind of focused on that and what I'd made my next move based on, what that nugget was. So when I was in this first not-for-profit, the Irish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, it was about children's participation in decision making. And so the next role I took was with a not-for-profit called spunout.ie, where I was their participation officer and deputy director. I started to realize, how important technology was to get messages to young people about the issues that were impacting on their lives, like health and well-being and sexuality. And in that not-for-profit, we started to build a relationship with some of the big tech companies at the time who were kind of doing their initial forays into trust and safety and kind of understanding how children were engaging with their products and services. And I remember being invited by Facebook at the time over to their Compassion Research Day in Menlo Park, as spunout.ie was one of Facebook's not-for-profit advisors, and we worked with them to help them understand various different issues. And I remember going, and I sat down and I was listening to kind of research that was being read out on empathy and like how products interact with users in relation to user reporting harm experiences. And I was like, okay, wow, so Facebook's a bit of a big deal. And it sounds like a lot of people are using it. And it also sounds like these companies and this company was really interested in investing in understanding their users and how they experience harm. And then actually there was one critical thing that happened at that Compassion Research Day at the time. I ended up having a very random lunch. One of the lads that I knew, Alex Holmes, who was in an NGO in the UK, he was like, do you want to come have lunch with my friend Monica? And I was like, Grant, yeah, let's go for have lunch with Monica. And it was Monica Lewinsky, who, as an Irish person, I just pretended not to know who she was. I was like, oh, Monica, nice to meet you, etc. Three of us sat down for lunch, and Monica shared her experience of online harms and bullying and harassment. And Alex was an expert in that space. And I just kind of, everything came together that day to kind of make me realize that the next path for me was into tech. And so that's where I moved to Facebook, worked in Facebook and Google in multiple different roles, operations roles, investigations, intel, policy, prevention, programming. Each of those kind of gave me a nugget of something that I wanted to continue to explore. And that's led to each shift to where I am today in policy for Google.
What keeps you in tech? Like, what keeps you in the trust and safety space?
The first thing that came to my head was the people. I think that's what's kept me here, is the incredible people that I continue to learn from and get a lot out of in terms of relationships, impact. But I think when I think past that, is my belief that we need people with a vocation in terms of safety, in terms of online harm, both inside and outside of tech, in order to keep pushing tech in the right direction to do the right thing for people and its users. I continue to believe that being inside tech is one of the best opportunities I have to scale it from back to prevent and respond to child sexual abuse. And I think that's what keeps me in big companies like Google, is that belief that I can continue to do a good job.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The people and the opportunity to scale the impact. One of the things you mentioned being inside, for you, large tech companies, large trust and safety teams, lot of public conversation around trust and safety over the past 10 years. A lot of oversimplification of what it's like, to do the work, especially at the scale of a Meta or a Google. What are some of the misconceptions that only people close to the work or having done the work would understand that maybe is not quite in line with the public conversation around our space?
When I think about this question, one of the first things that comes to mind before I answer it, I promise you I'll answer it, is that like a healthy mistrust, but a healthy maybe questioning by the public of large corporations, I think is a very good thing, right? I think we need that. We need people to be kind of worrying and wondering about what these very large corporations, what their interest is, and working to hold them to account in terms of speaking to regulators and kind of like pushing tech to do the right thing. So I understand that. I get that a lot in my life as well from from friends and family all the time. And I'm not always drinking the Kool-Aid here. And I understand that there's lots of issues with large tech companies as well. And large tech companies have a lot to do. So I wanted to just say that first. And I think a lot of those misconceptions might be based on people's either individual experiences or things tech has gotten wrong over the years. And that's kind of built up to kind of generate these misconceptions. But one thing I do wish people might know and understand is that there's humans in the loop. I think often there's kind of this idea that, these executives in these far off places, particularly in Europe, these executives in Silicon Valley are making decisions. And, there's no one who's reading my user reports. There's no one who's looking at what the best way to build these products are with my interests or my kids' interests in mind. It's just like, this kind of algorithmic kind of technologist churn. And so what I really would love people to understand is there's people like me, like Patricia, like Yoel, like you, and many others who are in the loop, who are thinking very thoughtfully about how products are designed, but also are being true advocates in this space as well, just like the advocates externally, be it the regulators in the world or be it the not-for-profits. We are here, we're in big tech, we're having very difficult conversations, we're pushing and pushing all the time. I think it's really important that we have the likes of myself and others inside, as well as having like people like us outside, so that it can continue to push tech in the right place.
I wrote down healthy mistrust as you were framing this part of your answer, and I remember from talking with a lot of colleagues, their beginnings in trust and safety started because they had a healthy mistrust, and so they felt like they wanted to explore and learn more, whether through academia or nonprofit work or the government. And so for me, that really resonates. You also kind of mentioned this concept of like being an advocate internally. Would love to hear how your experience of being a subject matter expert who comes from the nonprofit space and your experience over time of being an advocate, of helping to guide product teams. What sort of tactics do you use, and tell me more about what that is like from your perspective.
I kind of say me smirking because it's hard, and
Yeah.
it has its ups and downs. This is hard, John, too. Like you've been there. I think the place that I always like to start is to understand the product. Often, kicking in a door and be like, "Helen Lovejoy, can somebody please think of the children?" doesn't always work. And so where I really truly like to start is like, okay, I'm going to use this product. I'm going to sit down with the product team to understand what their product looks like, how it works, how it was built, what it can do. Over the years, I have a lot of people to be really thankful of there. Is like people have been really open to that. When I come to product teams like, hey, I'm from the child sexual abuse and exploitation team. I really want to understand your product so that I can help go back and kind of assess risk and give you the tools that you need to kind of move forward with your product to make sure it does not cause harm and that you can mitigate against any risk of people trying to misuse it. My second tactic as well is not to assume that people have a thorough understanding of what child sexual abuse and exploitation is. One of the things that I still see from executives is this concept that is just CSAM, as in it's imagery that represents child sexual abuse and exploitation, which is one of the most serious issues that we face in our space. What I have to do a lot of the time is like bring in some kind of education without kind of being condescending of like, well, let's sit down here and let's talk about what actual child sexual abuse and exploitation looks like so that you understand how your products can be impacted in this way. That's the place I often start, is that like, understand the product and help the product understand the risk. And from there, kind of try to build a relationship going forward. Today, that is challenged, I think. I've seen this trust and safety kind of ebb and flow from being seen as a service provider to being seen as a leader in product. Now maybe eking back like of where we are in 2025 to being seen as a service provider again, where product and engineering teams are kind of bring this kind of absolute value of everything should stay up. We should give the user everything. And so the tactics now have to change slightly, I think, again, for trust and safety teams that can continue to kind of like bring their expertise to the table on representing harm, bring data, evidence, expertise, and research to the table, and really kind of like having very challenging conversations with product teams to help them understand risks. That's very challenging at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, there's been a big evolution of trust and safety over the past 15 years. Certainly from my perspective of while at Twitter from our kind of executive team very early on when I was there, not really understanding what our team did, why we did it, to becoming the strategy of the entire organization at one point, and to kind of see that shift of kind of evolution, maybe back a little bit to those earlier days. From your perspective, is it harder to trust in safety now? Has it like how do you trust in safety in 2025? How are you ensuring that your team is prepared? How are you ensuring that the organization's prepared? I think one of the largest learning that I really took from my time at Twitter was this concept of going with the wind, not against it. Tell me what that's like right now. What does going with the wind look like?
Tough question for a European as well too, because the wind's blowing all different directions over here as well too. But how to trust and safety in 2025? My experience is really in the child sexual abuse and exploitation space. So let me just kind of like use that as the jumping off point. One of the things I observe, just to up level it, and I'm going to do the left to right spectrum here, which is not always like a safe place to be in, but I always think the left and the right both have an interest in child sexual abuse and exploitation. The left has an interest in prevention and maybe moving further upstream and doing more to shape ecosystems and environments to make sure child sexual abuse and exploitation doesn't happen. Whereas the right often comes at child safety from a criminological perspective, criminal justice perspective, incarceration, and sometimes reaffirm the right vilification. I think trust and safety in 2025 has been flowing from this evolution of different social values and governments at different point in time and different leanings. And where we are now, I think, in trust and safety is there's a greater emphasis on speech than there ever has been before. There's still a very great emphasis on privacy. People's trust of big tech, I think, is quite low, particularly in the European Union. There's more and more regulations, and there's lots of other kind of like variables that are going on. So how do I trust and safety in that? To use your phrase, John, like the way the wind's blowing. I think one is like finding what our common ground is. That's one. So understanding what product teams, and our common ground, thankfully, I observe in tech is child sexual abuse and exploitation is not acceptable, and we'll continue to combat that and allocate resources. So I'm really glad to see that. I think beyond that, of other aspects that might not necessarily be illegal aspects of child sexual abuse and exploitation, but might be kind of policy violative. So text representations of things or other types of not illegal content. I think that's really challenging right now. How to kind of go there at the moment in 2025, I think, is never waste a crisis. I think that's, I'm going to borrow your team term on that. I think you used that before me, but never waste a crisis and use crisis moments that come up to sit down, use the data, look at like the escalation cycle, look at how our users and our kind of like our stakeholders are thinking about things and like use that wind blowing in that direction. I think also trying to root as much as possible in the data is really, really important. Like showing companies the impact on their bottom line, the impact on their business is crucial, particularly given where we're at economically right now and there's lots of uncertainty. There's some of the things that I think about of how to trust and safety in 2025. But at the same time, to go with the winds blowing, I really hope that those advocates and those folks that are vocational kind of direction in tech don't stop being those difficult conversation starters in tech of us not to just go all the way with the winds blowing, but to make sure that we're continuing to kind of vocalize the principles of trust and safety and the principles of our users of what keeps our users safe. So I still think we should go against the wind sometimes too.
A safer internet doesn't happen by accident. It takes dedicated people and purpose-built solutions. That's where Safer comes in. Built by child safety technology experts using predictive AI and proprietary hash matching, Safer helps detect child sexual abuse material and exploitation at scale. Platforms like Blue Sky, Stability.ai, and Vimeo rely on Safer to proactively detect online sexual harms against children. Want to learn how you can put Safer to work on your platform? Visit safer.io. I'm glad you brought up being in Europe. Give us a little bit of context of what it's like to be in a trust and safety team of a very large, very US company.
It looks like late nights. There you go.
Yep.
No,
Yep.
but in all
Early
seriousness,
mornings too, probably.
I joke in some ways, but look, I don't think anyone who works for a large US multinational corporation is under any illusion that working for a large corporation based in the US, there's US interests at play. And so, but what's that like in the European Union? I think one, it's a really good opportunity. Like, I think working with lots of people across the globe, I think at a certain point when I was at Meta, for example, there was like 86 nationalities that I work with. So there's lots of cognitive diversity. There's lots of different ways of thinking about problems. And I think working in big tech in Europe in particular, that diversity is so huge and it's really important in trust and safety. And I've learned so much from it. Challenges are, it's demanding. It's like a vocational role. It's like a first responder role sometimes. It's like, I really feel it's equivalent to paramedics and nurses and other kind of caring professions. When you put that in a business environment, particularly US business environment, I think that's really challenging when you think about performance and bonuses and, business bottom line. And then you have like the caring profession with that. I think that's really challenging. And in Europe, where you're working those late nights, that can be quite difficult to manage. And I think the last thing I'll say as well too is like a lot of people live in Europe. I'm on this small rock in the Atlantic, and there's many more other people in Europe from lots of different backgrounds. And we're substantial users of these tech products. I think often there's frustration that European perspectives and perspectives from outside the US aren't always to the fore in decision making. So I think that can be challenging. And it's something that trust and safety professionals outside the US need to continue to make sure their users' perspectives are represented in decision making.
Switching gears a little bit, of course, Thorn is a nonprofit. You come from the nonprofit space. I'm really curious to get your perspective on what nonprofits like Thorn or others can do to support you, to support the humans on the front lines, or the teams or the companies or trust and safety teams rather, who are working on these issues at the scale that you're working on.
There's lots that not-for-profits can do here. I think before I answer the question directly, I think I observe this spectrum of not-for-profit behavior, which I really am really interested in, and it plays a really important role for big tech to have not-for-profits operate along this kind of very clunky spectrum I'll try and describe. From one is like not-for-profits who are like, I will not engage with tech, I completely mistrust tech, and I'm only going to talk about tech through the media or through regulators, and really kind of try and hold them responsible that way. And then over on the other side of the spectrum, they're the not-for-profits who are like, tech, we love you. How can we benefit from you? How can we speak for you? Like, how can we kind of show up? Those polls are there for very good reason, and lots of different not-for-profits have very good reasons to operate in those different spaces. And I think both those spaces actually serve tech, but probably somewhere closer to the middle is somewhere that's a little bit more of the sweet spot for tech. We need not-for-profits to hold us to account and to challenge us and on doing the right thing for safety by design in terms of the approaches we are or aren't taking as well. And we need not-for-profits to be critical and to hold us to account in those moments where we've got it wrong. But we also not need not-for-profits to work with us to help us understand issues in a way like Thorn does as well too. And my experience of working with Thorn over probably the last 10 years from working with Melissa and Rebecca and others is that we have that kind of relationship where Thorn's not afraid to step up to the plate to kind of, say when something is wrong. But also that doesn't stop operational relationships from continuing, whereby we can sit down and we can talk about, well, John, what do you need from a piece of research to help your job move forward? Like, what do you need to know about user reporting? What do you need to know about self-generated CSAM? Or with Rebecca, as we went in to build generative AI guidance, what do you need to help push your product teams forward? Like, what do you need to know to do a better job to prevent these models from producing CSAM? Keep us accountable and keep speaking out like authoritatively on these issues where you see wrong, but let's sit down and let's build operational connections where that we can share and understand how we move these products and services forward. I have a really good example of that recently. I'll call out my friend Kool-Aid Kira. Kool-Aid works in the University of Kent, very Irish name as well too. Anyone who can pronounce that is doing a good job. He's done some research funded by Safe Online through the Tech Coalition on understanding users' responses, the messaging to prevent them from continuing to seek CSAM or to kind of direct them to support resources. And so we sat down with Kool-Aid and other colleagues from not-for-profits and research and academia. We took those learnings together. We embarked on some co-design projects in Google. And just a couple of weeks ago, we launched a revamped CSAM search intervention on Google Search, that's working to prevent and direct users to support resources rather than keeping seeking CSAM. And that's using the kind of most up-to-date research. That's lots of organizations who've been critical of Google over the years and continue to hold us to account, but still will sit down with us to kind of make sure that we move products forward as well, so that we build the best outcomes for our users.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially from being an insider at one point in my career. And this is sort of to provide more color on sort of the framing around going with the wind. I think kind of internally, you're anchored in certain principles around what, harms and how to mitigate them. And oftentimes it can be very helpful to get the perspective from outside the organization. Even if maybe you worked with this person your entire career, or if you came from a similar field, it can be very powerful to get a perspective from a nonprofit, from an academic, from someone who's deeply ingrained in the space to help push a perspective to help then find a balance of a solution that helps, again, anchor in your principles while still achieving the business objective. What kind of advice would you give to a young cheetah who is attempting to explore this space, who's maybe driven by a strong purpose or a strong mission lens, but really is interested to navigate the nonprofit and the trust and safety tech company space?
I've been doing a little bit of this actually with the Trust and Safety Professionals Association recently. They do these really great coffee chats. So just going to shout that out. Actually, if there are people looking for that advice, check out the TSBA coffee chat section of their website. But what I say to these young cheetahs, I would say be a Swiss Army knife is one of the first things that I say. I think one of the things that I feel I benefited from in my career is like picking up different skills along the way, not being great at all of them. Like the Swiss Army knife can opener, it's not the best can opener, but it can still open a can. I think it rounds you out as a trust and safety professional. Like if you're understanding SQL, but then you understand how photo DNA works, or you've done scaled review, and you've written a policy, or you've worked on like scaled enforcement, like all of those things come together to help really round you out in your career. So that's the first thing I'd say. Two is don't drink the Kool-Aid too much. I think have a little sip of the Kool-Aid and kind of make sure you get to know the company. But also, if you're coming in and you're mission driven and your mission is in relation to adult sexual exploitation, child abuse, hate speech, harassment, maintain that. I think I've seen the people in trust and safety be most successful where they understand the company and they enjoy the company and the products, but they're also, haven't had the full bottle of Kool-Aid, and they're continuing to be like those eternal advocates that kind of push things forward. I think they're the two biggest things I would say to people. And, don't be afraid to try and build those technical relationships as well. I understand that like not everyone in trust and safety is going to be technically minded. I'm certainly not. I probably can write like 2 to 3 SQL queries max, and that's about it. But what I would say is like building those technical relationships, maybe the third thing I'd say is that can really help round you out as a person in trust and safety, where you've got those PMs that you've got relationships with, you've got those engineers, you've got those data scientists as well too, so that you can kind of help round your profile out to kind of like move forward and be successful as you grow from a cheetah cub into a fully grown cheetah.
Love that. Wanting to pivot a little bit to generative AI, obviously, Google's on the front lines of this technology and kind of how it is evolving. For our listeners, John has been involved with Thorne's safety by design principles around the AI space. John, how has Gen AI really impacted trust and safety through the day-to-day work, but also maybe like from like a big, bolder perspective?
From a business perspective, Gen AI is a critical mission piece for large tech right now. I think we can see all of the large tech companies wanting to either be a frontier model developer or in their current product offerings to integrate AI within those suite of tools that they're offering to users. So that means like it's impacting on everyday operations. So in your CSAM review queues, it's impacting because now we're reviewing for CSAM, but we're also trying to understand whether the CSAM is AI generated or not. It's impacting in our tooling positively because our classifier is now doing a slightly better job potentially. If we're using large language models for text detection over previously maybe kind of applied machine learning models that maybe are less precise. So things are getting slightly better on the tooling side. There is a concern that harm will start to grow, and this is something that Thorne, you guys have talked about in the Stanford Internet Observatory research report that you did as well too, where we're concerned about the trajectory for the amount of content that we're going to see that is harmful and or abusive growing. I think we're starting to see the early signs of that coming through as well. So that's impacting on the day to day in terms of the volumes that we're seeing and the complexity that comes with those issues. And then the pace at which different types of modalities are kind of coming through are also something that is I think probably a boulder than a pebble. But we've gone from a year and a half ago basic large language, say basic, it sounds mad, this is called GenAI basic at this point in time, but like basic large language models, modality of text to text. So now through to agentic behavior, whereby models are running on browsers and taking actions, or we've got video gen. And so the pace at which all of those things change are just like adding overhead onto trust and safety, creating new risks to think about, challenging trust and safety applications of function, whereby we have to get into a much more adversarial mindset now to do safety evals and so on. So I'm rambling a bit there, but like there's a lot's changed. And what I've really been heartened to see is how quickly trust and safety has been able to take their initial suitcase of tools and apply that to generative AI, but also adapt and change and work with engineers and technical partners to build the new tools that we need at the same time. And also refine and hone, new disciplines required, like safety evaluations, like red teaming, etc.
Is there anything about Gen AI that is exciting for you? Yeah, obviously, we have to think at the intersection of harm and technology, and friends of mine over the years have asked, John, what do you do? As I think in worst case scenarios all day, essentially. But is there anything about the space that's exciting from your point of view?
Yeah, I think there's plenty. The story of technology, any technology is always the positive and negative use of that technology. You see it since, the car or whatever else is being developed. So yeah, it's good to take a quick moment to kind of think about that. What am I excited about? I'm really excited about victim ID. I've seen some of my wonderful colleagues, our victim investigation team, do amazing things with image kind of readable AI as well too, where they're able to kind of detect and understand different symbols or backgrounds. That's really exciting for me of like how AI might allow us to move forward in the victim ID space. I think I'm excited about how Gen AI can help us kind of improve our precision and recall and our detection capabilities as well. Like how large language models can help us like do a better semantic understanding of language in abusive spaces as well too. I'm also excited for the potential preventative application of Gen AI. I know how important, and the clinicians will probably say when you still need the human in the loop, but like for initial steps forward, I'm really excited about like how health and and well-being can use these tools as well too. I think that's really, really exciting. And also just personally, I've really enjoyed Notebook
Bring it.
LM. Yeah, it's everyone talks about Notebook LM, but like any piece of research I read now, I add it into Notebook LM, and I have maybe 90 to 100 pieces of like PDFs in there right now. And when I'm in like a meeting, I'm having a challenging conversation with like, a stakeholder about like the harm of one particular issue or another. I have my Notebook LM out. I can drop in a quick note into it and be like, what does the research say on adversarial uses of Gen AI, or give me a list there and then. So
Wow.
that's just one thing that I find like really helpful is like on the tooling side, on the knowledge side as well too.
Love that. I think one of the things that's really interesting and can be really powerful about the space that we operate in is the collaboration, the sort of community effort, especially when there's a novel technology or a new technology or an evolving technology. I know there has been a lot of collaboration from the nonprofit space, but also inside the tech space. How have you found the kind of community response to Gen AI, and where do you see that as helpful, and where do you see that going?
I think that community response, particularly in the trust and safety area, has been immediate. And I'm not surprised by trust and safety professionals. They immediately saw the potential harm in this technology immediately and started asking the right questions, starting bringing people together in an appropriate way to kind of start to understand, okay, we're on day one here. like, how do we move forward with this? There's two organizations I think have been have exemplified this kind of community push. Torn is one. Again, that's not a plug for Torn or otherwise, but the work that your team, John, Rebecca in particular, has done to kind of not just bring the community of technologists together in this space, but also regulators, other NGOs, hotlines, academics, to kind of like build those principles. Like that was done, September a year ago, but or sorry, probably it was April a year ago, but it started like the September of the year before that, and it really kind of exemplified people who understand child sexual abuse and exploitation coming together as a community, challenging themselves early in a technology development life cycle to kind of let's see where can we start with here to make sure that we learn the lessons of like safety by design from previous iterations of technology and kind of put that to the fore. So props to Thorn on that, and specifically to Rebecca. And then the Technology Coalition, so member organization of tech companies who are combating child sexual abuse. The team at the TC immediately saw how companies were starting to adapt their tech stack and bring GenAI in. They convened that community of members and really started to build out resources for different size members, big tech, medium, and small, to make sure that there was a more consistent response here. I don't want to pat ourselves too much in the back because there's still a lot to do here, but I'm really kind of heartened by their community response in this issue is like noticing potential risk, bringing community together, building out resources, and like continuing to communicate. I think that's also critical. One of the things that we need to not do with technology development is to go, all right, principles are done, see you later. If we need to iterate on those and learn from how harm might change and adapt, or how adversarial use might change and adapt. And I see our community doing that.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The push and the drive to collaborate and to share knowledge is something that has been core to this space from the beginning. As we get towards the end of our time here together, what gives you hope for the future?
Probably people. It's people, really. Whenever I've had challenging moments, I remember being in a meeting not too long ago on, a challenging issue, and a particular person in the meeting responded to something by saying, I don't want to hear the evidence. I don't care what the evidence is. It was a conversation about principles. And I left that meeting feel really deflated. But after that meeting, I got, a lot of people reached out to kind of figure out what our strategy was to move forward. And that community, those people within trust and safety, and the people that are coming into trust and safety, I think that gives me hope. I think technology is going to continue to push the boundaries of humanity. It's going to continue to push the boundaries of what's possible to harm other humans, children. I think the world that we live in is particularly challenging for many of us in terms of, people feeling safe and comfortable in society, who they are. People wonder about what the future holds politically and economically and, for themselves as human beings. And within all of that, I think it's the people that I meet and I work with in this trust and safety space that gives me hope that will continue to move in the right direction, that will put users first, will put safety first, and hopefully get us to a good spot.
The power of relationships. I love that. John, thank you for your time, for your commitment in this space, for bringing that sense of humanity that we spoke about earlier. Really enjoyed having you on, and I wish you nothing but the best, man.
Thanks, John. Good.
To our listeners, thanks for being part of the conversation. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. If you want even more from today's guest, be sure to check out our lightning round Q&A session on YouTube.